Hey, good morning, everyone. It's bright and early here at Blue Gold Electronics on a Saturday morning about 5 a.m. Thought I'd make a video this morning before the rest of the family got up. And the video is titled, Is Your Issue the Dolby Board? Relating to the Sansui 9090dB and 8080dB units. I've received some feedback. One of my admirers here on the YouTube channel took my video and posted it on the Audio Karma exclusively Sansui forum thread. And I got some feedback from a few people on there, and I kind of took the feedback to heart. It's how we grow and learn. And I thought I'd bring the feedback over here and drop it into a video and kind of bring it all into context relative to the previous video that I made. Okay, the feedback that I received, some of it came from Audio Karma, the forum I mentioned. Some of the other came from my YouTube channel. But here's kind of what I got. First and foremost, not all signal issues in the Sansui 8080 9090 dBs are relating on the front end or relating to the Dolby board. And I agree with that statement 100%. The reason I made the statements I did in my video is I've probably worked on, I don't know exactly how many, but it's dozens of 8080 and 9090 dB units over the years. Matter of fact, I've had two in the shop in the last month, an 8080 and a 9090, both of which had issues relating to the Dolby board. But I had one in maybe 3 months ago that did not. It just turned out to be the driver board on the output there. So not all issues with this are related to the Dolby board. And what the individuals called out was I should troubleshoot that first. And honestly, I did. I just didn't show it in my video. So and maybe my language in the video was a little slanted towards, hey, the output's checked out good, so head straight to the Dolby board. Must be what's wrong with the input. The reality is I spent some time on the bench. I don't show everything I make in my video, or these things would be hours long. I already get comments my videos are too long from a few people. And I get a lot of feedback that, hey, I really like the thoroughness of your videos, so I'm kind of torn on what to do there. Any rate, first off, you should troubleshoot, is it the Dolby board or not? And today I'm going to show you that in this video. It's the purpose of this video. The feedback I got, it might be switches and pots, might be ribbon cables, etc. We'll show you how to test all that. Second piece of feedback I got was you do not have to pull the switch on the Dolby board to fix the feed-throughs. If you remember, I went through the kind of the elaborate steps of pulling that switch off just so I can make sure I could get to both sides of the feed-throughs on that little board. And what people are saying is basically you can feed that little metal jumper you make down through and heat it enough and flow some solder through there well enough to get both sides heated up. And I believe that. I do. Me personally, I'd pull the board. I do it on both sides, but other people have had success without doing that. So, and I do believe that. So just letting you know that's a possibility if you want to try a little bit shorter step. Could get you there successfully. The next thing I got was, hey, you can reflow the board and not have to resolder the feed throughs. And that's one, gosh, I'm torn on. I personally not a big fan of reflowing boards, although I have done some computer boards and gaming system boards in the past that need to be reflowed to get them working properly. Matter of fact, my son's PlayStation 4 one time had an issue with that I had to help him fix. But people have said it works, so I had to take them at their word and believe they have. I'll leave it to you to do research on that. There's some posts out there on forums about it, but theoretically you can either use a high temperature air gun or some kind of butane torch setup to actually heat all the solder on the boards and basically flow through to the pass-throughs and not have to repan all these boards. So I'll leave you to research that one. I'll tell you how I did it. You saw how I did it. But other people have said they've had success. The reality is maybe you could take this 8-hour job or whatever it took me, something like that, and you might could cut it down if you don't remove the switch and you reflow the board. You might cut it down to an hour job, and it might be worth trying that to see if it fixes it. And then if it does, roll on and listen to your stereo. And if it doesn't, then you can always go back and repin. So that's a thought. And Lastly, I got some feedback here by solder, desoldering setup of some type. And that's one where I've actually had 2 desoldering stations and a desoldering iron, basically one of the little things with the soldering irons with the bulb on the end of it. And while they all work, I've just found them to be somewhat of a pain in the, a little more than I want to deal with personally. Changing out cartridges, they're always getting gunked up. It seems like I spend half my time kind of servicing the desoldering setup as I do desoldering with it. But that's just my personal experience. Other people are saying they've had great experience with them. So maybe I need to give it another try. Maybe I need to learn something there. But what I found works best for me is just a simple solder sucking bulb. However, as you notice, mine dry rotted because it was probably, I think I got it in 1987. Had been using it all these years. And as you saw, I ordered a replacement and it turned out to be a piece of inferior junk. So I'm still searching for a good one. I'll find one here at an upcoming Hamfest or something. And just feedback there, other people said they've had great lucks with desoldering setup. So I may try that out again one more time. Okay, first step in troubleshooting this thing, we must understand the signal path in these units. So when you're looking at a Sansui unit, not all components there on the schematic or when you look at it one physically are related to the signal path. They may be, power supply, they may be part of the generating a signal like the FM unit. They may be part of the speaker protection relay. There's a lot of boards and a lot of circuits here that have nothing to do with the signal path. They're related to the stereo and how it functions, but the signal path doesn't necessarily flow through them. So, this schematic for this unit is, on a scale of 1 to 10, honestly, it's up there. It's probably a good 7 or 8 to decipher. I studied it a lot myself over the years, and it's pretty complex. Not that if you break it down piece by piece you can't understand it, but it's a pretty, it's not like a small little single-ended amplifier or something. Pretty darn complex. So I kind of broke down here for you the elements that the signal path flow through, so you don't have to spend hours and hours with the schematic. First off, the signal comes into the input board, basically the jacks in the back, which connect over via some ribbon cables to a board. It's called the equalizer circuit board in the Sansui service manual, and built onto that board is also the selector switch, and this board is called F2653. So your signal could be dying in that board, and I will tell you, I have seen that selector switch right there be dirty and need cleaning with some deoxit, and that in itself has freed up and cleaned up the front end signal. I have seen that switch in itself cause the problem and it not end up being the Dolby board. From there it flows to the Dolby board and basically the switch on it, and I need to find out the switch number there. I meant to put that there. But bottom line is that switch can get gunky, need cleaning with some deoxit, which you can get to and do without removing this board. And then you can rotate that little switch back and forth and maybe fix the problem without it being the board. Then there's a push switch circuit board, which has a bunch of switches on it. I'll show you that in a minute, called F2654. From there, the signal kind of flows into the volume and balance controls. The minus dB audio switch on the filter circuit board, and there's the number for that board. Then flows into the tone controls and the filter circuits, and it's 2 different boards. Then it goes back to, it goes back to the input board, which then feeds to the pre-outs on the back. Then it goes from that via the little jumpers back into the main end and goes to the driver board. And I showed you a video on how to repair that driver board one time. It's a little board that stands up and down and plugs into the power supply board. From there it goes to the output transistors. From the output transistors it goes to the speaker protection board. From there it goes to the speaker selection switch, and from there it goes out to the speaker connections and out to your speakers. So that's the signal path in one of either the 8080 dB or 9090 dB units. Okay, this is out of the service manual, and there's a couple different pages here, and it shows the different settings of the Dolby switch and how the signal path flows. But the gist of what I wanted to show you here is if you'll notice all your inputs, phono 1, phono 2, auxiliary coming from the FN, they all feed into this switch right here, which is on the F2653 board. In other words, the selector switch. From the selector switch, it then feeds into, if you'll notice, the switch here on the 2655, which is the Dolby board. So this is the input board that we showed you. This is the Dolby board. From there, it starts feeding up and down, and depending on which version of this little diagram, based on which of these switches, it flows through different switches up here, all on this F2654 push switch button board, which, by the way, is the board connected to the Dolby board via ribbon cables. All these little lines you see right here, along the way here, feeding and up and down, back and forth, etc. That's all happening via those ribbon cables. Ultimately, your signal works its way through the Dolby circuit, and it goes out here basically through the balance pots and volume pots, is where the signal leaves this unit. So if we want to dissect this unit at some point, we want to think about where the signal enters this unit and where the signal exits this unit. Okay, this is just a small snippet of the overall schematic for this unit. Probably 1/10 of the schematic. It's a much bigger page, and you can see how complex this thing is and how hard it would be to kind of follow the signal flow. But if you'll notice here, 2655 is the Dolby board here, and that's this section down here. And if you'll notice, this 2654 is that push button switch board up here, and you see all these switches here. All these little wires leading between, like right here, 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 all along in here, these are the ribbon cables. So you can see if these switches are gunked up, you very well may kill your signal here in the Dolby board. 2, if these ribbon cables are broken, you will kill the flow of your signal here in the Dolby board. You almost have to think of this as one board. It just happens to extend the Dolby board through these ribbon connectors to get to all these switches. You can kind of think of it that way. Okay, if you have an 8080 or 9090 DB and do not have an oscilloscope or a signal generator, these are some steps you could go through to try to troubleshoot and see if you can fix your unit without repairing the Dolby board. First thing you would want to do is pull the pre-out main end jumpers on the back, and I showed you that in one of my first videos, a little set of U connectors. Feed a signal from another source, maybe straight from your iPhone and through a mini phono connector to RCA jumper cable into your the main end, or maybe from a CD player or whatever you have. Feed it into the main end, see if you get audio out of the final amplifier. If so, then you know your amplifier is good. If not, then you need to be troubleshooting on the back end of this unit, either the driver board or the output transistors themselves. If you happen to have another amp, you could feed the signal from the pre-out to it and see if it plays. If so, then the front end of this thing is good. But if your signal feeds into the main end on the back and you play and it plays well, but you can't feed that signal through the entire Sansui amp with the jumpers in through like the aux port, then you're killing the signal somewhere on the front end and continue down this path. Clean the selector switch first off. Deaux at D5, work it back and forth many times. I have seen that. I had one in here a few months ago. That fixed the issue with it. That alone. Clean the volume, balance, tone control pots, get some deoxit in there, work them back and forth 100 times. Clean the Dolby switch itself. And along the way, each of these, be testing the unit to see if it's working. You may have solved it already at this point. Remove the faceplate. If you haven't solved it thus far, remove the faceplate. Do your best. You may have to remove the 2 screws on the end of the little switch, push switch board to be able to wiggle it around a little bit, but do your best to get some deoxit down into those switches. You may have to work with that little nozzle or work it back in there and work those things in and out many times. Make sure you hit the loudness, the tape monitor 1, 2, and the -20 dB audio mute switch. That in itself may fix your issue. If it doesn't, it is likely the Dolby board and or ribbon cable connectors, but not 100%. You really needed a scope to determine that, but it's a good 90% chance you're headed down the Dolby board path at this point in time. Okay, I thought I'd give you a little context. On the back over here, you can't see it, but that's where the aux inputs, phono inputs, etc. come in. And they feed via these ribbon cables right here I'm pointing to, down to this board, and this is the what we call the input board. And if you'll notice, on it right here is this selector switch, and that's the one I told you really clean. I have seen that switch alone cause the signal to drop out in one of these units. But what I really wanted to point out to you is the signals enter this through these ribbon cables right here. The signals leave this unit through this little jumper right here. It's a blue ground and center signal wire, and a gray ground and center signal input wire. In other words, shield and center connector that's positive with the actual signal flowing through it. And then when it leaves that, it comes around, it comes over here, and that same little wires I was showing you come to this board. And this little part of the wire right here is the shield, the same as this part of the wire is the shield. This white part here and the white part here are the actual audio signals entering into the Dolby board. Okay, so first off, if you got a scope and a signal generator, feed your signal generator into the aux port on the back, put your selector switch on the aux port. At that point, see if you've got a signal right here with the oscilloscope on that part and this part right here. If you do, then you know your signal is getting to the Dolby board, okay? Up next, right beside the Dolby board, and you can see it right down in here on this slide, is this pot right here. And this is the balance and volume control pot. And I'll demonstrate for you in a little bit, but right down in here, on this wiper right here, and on this wiper right here, see if you have a signal, a nice sine wave feeding from the aux all the way through to it. If you do, then you're making it through the Dolby board just fine, and the Dolby board is probably not your issue. Could be on down the signal path somewhere else. Go back to the slide I showed you earlier. But if you're not getting a signal right here, and you were getting a signal right here, guess what? Your problem lies somewhere here with the Dolby board. So at that point in time, pull the Dolby board. You will have one of two things. You will either have a board that looks just like this, or you will have a board that looks like this. And the difference is, this is an earlier model. They use some computer style ribbon cable, and inside of these, what you basically have is a flat piece of thin signal trace wire, in other words, circuit trace. So think of it as a circuit board that's been coated on both sides. And the problem with these is you bend them a few times and these little things get hairline cracks inside of them. So an easy way to test that once you've got this board pulled, just go from one end here to one end here with a continuity tester on your digital multimeter and see if it beeps. In other words, are you getting signal from there to there, and just walk your way along all the way down from there to there. Make sure you're lining up, and it's not hard to follow the pins down. If all these pins connect to all these pins, then you know your issue is not with the ribbon connector. Then you probably need to move on to these feed throughs being your issue at that point in time. By the way, if you have these, you might want to consider replacing them. You know, it's up to you. You can find these newer cables out there. I've seen some on eBay, and various parts houses sell them. Sometimes you may have to cut them. They may come in a wider set of maybe 6 or so, and you may have to cut them down to 4 or cut them down to 5 like on this one. But hey, if you found, let's just say right here, this fifth one over right here and here, it didn't have continuity. In other words, it's broken in the middle. You can simply get you some 24 gauge wire, solder it right here, solder it down there to the other pin, just have a wire running in parallel with this, and you could have solved your problem right there. So it all depends on what effort you want to go to. I will tell you, these type connectors, they actually have a wire inside of them instead of a circuit trace, and they're much more likely to withstand bending and movement, and less likely to break. So if you find one of these units, you can still go through and test continuity from one side to the other, but you're more than likely at this point, if you pull one out and see this, you're more than likely headed down the feed through path at this point in time. So you know, it's it is what it is. These boards, like I talked about, this is kind of one functional unit altogether, connected via, basically an umbilical cord here of ribbon cable. So you can kind of think of these switches here as being, part of this board. But these are those switches I talked about earlier. You're going to want to make sure you try to pull the faceplate and work your little nozzle down in here, and do your best to get some down in there and clean these things, and work them in and out from there. All right, we're going to make a little bit of live video here on this unit, how I shot it. I will tell you that, I went about it a certain way, and I'm sure I'll get feedback. There's another way of doing it, or there's a simpler way of doing it, a quicker way of doing it. I just went about it the way I know, logically, kind of what comes into this board and what leaves this board, and I kind of use the schematics to get me there, and use the schematics to kind of flow out this signal path in this unit. So, I'm sure there are better ways, and hopefully, somebody will give me some feedback and I can make some comments on this. But let me show you what I've got going on. I got the Sansui laying up here on the bench. We've got just trusty old oscilloscope. I use the Tektronix 2246, but a Rigel or whatever, it doesn't matter. You're tracing a 1 kilohertz sine wave, so you don't need any specialized equipment to do that. And if you'll notice, I'm just feeding down to a scope probe. Got the ground on my scope here, just going to the chassis ground here on this unit. And then I'm using a, in my case, B&K Precision 4003 function generator. You could use any old audio generator. If it'll make a sine wave, and you can adjust it, up towards line level to feed into the aux of this thing, you're good to go. So you don't need any, super special equipment to be able to do that. So the bottom line is I've got a close to a 1 kilohertz signal feeding in here, coming out of it here into basically going into the back aux ports of this unit, which, if you'll remember, feeds through these ribbon cables down into this input board through the selector switch, ultimately out this little jumper connector here, and feeds then to the Dolby board. So let's just do a little bit of testing on this unit. Alright, I've tried to get a video shot here where you can see both the oscilloscope, the input board, and the Dolby board, and the volume/balance control. So first off, if you'll notice, feeding in over here on the input, you can see the scope light up over here with a nice sine wave. I just knows I'm getting through the jack into this ribbon cable. Once it feeds up over the ribbon cable and kind of comes into the other side here, you can see I'm getting signal on the other side here. Ultimately makes its way through the selector switch, etc., and then it goes out through this first pin here, and this last pin here on this connector right here. If you remember, I showed that connector earlier. It was the one with the blue and the gray wires. So at this point, I know my signal is making it all the way through this input board and the selector switch. From there, it feeds around, comes around, and goes right here. And you can see this little white wire is the one that actually carries the signal. This other one's ground. The same as this white wire is the one that carries the signal. The other is ground. And if you'll notice right here, I've got a nice sine wave up here again. And if you'll notice right here, I have a nice sine wave up there as well. What does that tell me? It tells me I'm getting signal all the way through here, all the way through that board, all the way through the jumper, and I have made it to the Dolby board. So we've got signal going into the Dolby board at this point. And keep in mind, at that point, the signal is flowing all through this board, up through the ribbon cables, into these switches up here, back down through those switches, back down to the Dolby board. But ultimately, what I want to look at this point is, where does the signal leave the Dolby board? Well, it leaves via some wires that go from the Dolby board to this both volume and balance control pods. If you'll remember, I showed you that in the schematic earlier, and if you remember when I did this board, there was a when I took the board out, basically this pot had to come with it because there's so many wires going back and forth in between them. Well, one good way of checking here is just check the wipers on this thing right here. Look up there. The signal's smaller because of the volume control, but you've got signal coming in on both sides. And if I want to get up here and basically actually connect to the the wipers here, you can see on the volume control pot, and you just have to kind of, you really need a flashlight and you can get up in there and see, but you can see where the leads come out of the other side of these front two pots here. I've got a nice signal on both of those coming out of the volume control. What that tells me is I have signal leaving the Dolby board. If I had signal getting to the Dolby board but not coming out to the volume pots, basically I'm dead somewhere in here. And at that point in time, I'm going to want to go ahead and pull this board out, check all those ribbon cable connections like I talked about a minute ago, do a continuity test on all those. If that's not the issue, then you could you could go right on to doing what I showed you earlier in the previous video, fixing all the feed throughs on this unit. I'm sure that I'll get some feedback from others that there's probably another way of doing this. There's probably some pin right here that I could go test and it would tell me whether it's the ribbon cable or not. There may be some shortcuts other people have learned over time. This is how I went about it. Is signal entering this board? Is signal leaving this board? If not, somewhere within this board or the function switches above, I'm losing out signals. So, I could pull this board, I could clean those switches really well, check that first. If that doesn't solve it, I could then test all the continuity on the ribbon cables. If that doesn't solve it, then dive into the feed throughs. But it's just how I went about it logically, following the schematics, etc. Hope you learned something here today. This should help people figure out whether they have a Dolby board and whether they want to go through the 8-hour painful exercise that I did, or maybe explore some of these other shortcut options I mentioned earlier that I got feedback around. Thanks again for watching, everybody. Really appreciate the customer. Let me keep this thing around a couple more days to make this video here. Hopefully I'll get this thing to him today. I think he bought this thing new back many years ago, and he's excited to get it back, and I'm excited to get it to him. So thanks for watching, everybody.